Okay, Hafide, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission Subcommittee meeting on the Law Enforcement Officer General Force Leadership Structure Tier project that we've been pretty much doing for like about a year. And one of the things I'd like to do is, in moving forward, is I'm just going to go through the slideshow real quick, because the meat and the potatoes really is in the document that you have before you. Before I do, I'm going to acknowledge the following so that we know that we have possibly a quorum. We have the Guam Police Department, Major Manny Chong. We have from the Guam Airport Police, Ray Reyes. We have from the Guam Attorney General's Office, Mr. Anthony Blas and Mr. Anthony Camacho. From Guam Customs, we have myself, Vince Ferris. From Department of Corrections, we have Anton Uggan. And from the Department of Administration, we have Mr. Shane Nagata and Mr. Francis Flisco. From DYA, we have Mr. David Bison. And from the ARF, from the airport, we have Mr. Raymond Mantanonia. Hafide, thank you, good morning. It is 9:45 in the morning. And I'm just gonna go through this PowerPoint real quick. It's not, just in case you guys see something that you might want to discuss a little bit further, we'll go ahead, but really the intent is just so that we can give a refresher. So the first slide really just says that Public Law 3654 had created a new section to create and establish a standard uniform law enforcement officer general force leadership structure tier and pay plan for peace officers. The reason why we're here this morning is really to focus in on the law enforcement force structure. We don't have the resources or the capability at this time to take a look at the pay plan, and there was a pay study that was recently done in January. That just reiterates what I said. Okay, so as it starts to load, what the intention is to utilize a standard that's pretty much been set out there, and the one standard that has been used and we consider as a benchmark in which other law enforcement entities and agencies are compared to is normally we pull from GPD. So we are utilizing the Guam Police Department's Officer Series model from its Officer 1 all the way up to its Police Commander position. And there is some room for additional positions within certain tiers of the law enforcement force structure. And so the tiers are really pretty much broken into 4 areas. You have your entry-level tier, you have your journeyman tier, you have your supervisory / specialized tier, and then you have your final tier, your highest tier, which is the executive / strategic leadership tier. What this says really is that there was a gap analysis that was conducted, and what was found is that in many law enforcement organizations within the government of Guam, there were differences in classifications of officers for pretty much performing the similar levels of duties and responsibilities, and that we recognize that in some cases education, training, and certification also has to play a part. So we dove deeper, and that's one of the reasons why the legislature requested that we come up with this force structure. Background is pretty much, it goes all the way back to September 11th when they umbrellaed many entities under the Department of Homeland. And so one of the things is just like with them, they have like a general structure on pay, like a GS 579. And so some of the facets of the federal government are also being looked at as far as like non-competitive, self-competing promotion up to, I think it's right below the rank of supervisor. So that way, if you're a very proactive employee, you can aspire to be what you can and get there sooner rather than later, and we'll stop having these 30-some years. We are utilizing the Guam Police Department benchmark positions. We are using the Office of OPM Competencies model. We have also taken a look at the Air Force Instruction 362618 Air Force Enlisted Force Structure. And we've also taken facets from the federal career ladder model and the general competencies model. So what this slide here is basically a career ladder non-competitive promotion type system, and I'm utilizing aspects of this where you can come in as a GS 5, 7, or 9 into the federal government, and based on your knowledge, training, experience, and education. What we found personally for me in the Guam Customs and Quarantine Agency, our officers who have been with the agency for at least 3 to 4 years are normally hired on with CBP at a GS9 level. And if you take a look at the salaries, there's such a big gap as far as what our officers after like 10, 15 years are making compared to what their entry-level positions are making. So this is just to reiterate what we were talking about earlier about GS 579, the capability of if you come in and you've got like certain experience, training, or education, that there will be consideration as far as where to slot you. So utilizing the entry level as a trainee, we have training level positions, which would be training 1, training 2, training 3. If you got out of high school and you're coming in and you need to take the full gamut, which is both the basic law enforcement academy and then the in-house agency law enforcement training, you would come in as a LEO 1, and then when you get your basic law enforcement academy certificate, you would come in as a 2. If you came in with 60 credits or more, you would come in as a LEO 3. And these are things that could help us to use towards inviting people to come because they have education, training, or experience. This basically is just a 4-year, I guess, plan. If you were to take a look at it, that if you were to come in and you start to do the career development courses, and then you time and grade, time and service, you're self-competing, you would be able to, in several years, get to a certain level. What I've done is that even in the documents that you have before you is to make it simple for us to understand. I just started to color code it that way. You know that as you move forward from one tier to the other, there's a separation. And you'll see that as a common theme throughout this whole situation. This is just to reiterate, the black level is entry level, which is your guard, cadet, recruit, training with basic law enforcement and training with 60+ credits. Then your journeyman tier, which is your tactical operations and intermediate tier. Then your supervisory tactical operations, which is your special agents, which will be possibly in new positions. Your Sergeant 1 and Sergeant 2, your section office supervisor, and possibly your bureau commander. And then the next one will be your management executive strategic leadership tier, which is in green, which would be your department commander, your bureau commander, and your bureau operations officer, executive officer. And then if you notice that between the black and the yellow tier, these are the ones where you non-competitively promote against yourself. Once you get past that level and you're fully tenured in your apprenticeship program, and you're like a craftsman or master craftsman, everything else above that is competitive. All this shows is just a roundabout way of looking at the structure to give you guys like a visual. I believe I may have that also in this document.
Here too.
This is just another reiteration. I'm trying to make sure that I go through fast. In this particular one, if you take a look at the extreme right of this one area that shows comparisons, it shows that there is a room to create what is called a LEO 7 or police officer 4 position, a special agent 1 and a special agent 2, and then it reallocates certain pay grades in line with the move, so that the pay grade and the classifications are much cleaner. These are things that I'm going to go into when we sit and discuss it. But what I'm hoping for is that everybody had already taken a look at the documentation, and then we can just dive really straight into it. Because if we're able to finish it today, then there will be no need for us to come back tomorrow. We just need to make sure that in moving forward, we know what the plan is. So this one just reiterates what I said earlier, that certain positions will be upgraded and then certain positions are going to be created. This is something that we will be touching on as part of the strategic plan moving forward. Is the expected outcomes and deliverables. So in moving forward, it looks like an organizational chart from each law enforcement office, agency, PDs. We already have this as a subcommittee meeting that we're going to be looking at. We're going to vote to formally adopt the procedure, and then formally identify what further steps and processes need to be taken by which responsible entity, and establish timelines and benchmarks.
Chief, real quick.
Yes.
Is this a Q&A? Can we ask questions as needed? Can we go to the previous slide? The one that breaks down okay. Does this take into consideration the 80% that we just got paid? Because it looks like
it might have taken, because I noticed that in the 18%, certain positions were already reallocated. Mm-hmm. What the intention is that if the position was allocated, it might actually just fit anyway. Mm-hmm. But these are things that are, generally speaking, it's not set in stone. Okay. The whole point is to come up with a force structure. Like I said, the pay doesn't, at this point, doesn't really matter, mm-hmm. because what we're trying to do is we're trying to create benchmark positions, mm-hmm. in a law enforcement force structure. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that certain positions with the police department were already allocated, but what I'm seeing is that some positions may still be further allocated to a higher level.
Yeah, okay. So like on the portion of the Special Agent 1 and Special Agent 2,
yeah.
Are those promotions from a PO3 right below a sergeant, or would that be, because technically it'll be PO3s that would be the Special Agent, or PO2s, even PO1s, mm-hmm. If they're in the detective or juvenile investigation, even the task forces. Right. Okay. Those are the people that would fit in those classifications, because they are special agents, but yet their rank is PO1, right. PO2, PO3. Then the special agent 2, of course, would be a PO3. Mm-hmm. So it is the intention for the commission to make those a promotion from PO3, Special Agent 1, Special Agent 2, or would they be in line with PO3?
So, like right now, what we're hearing and what we're seeing is that many of the law enforcement agencies right now are underfilling, overfilling, where you take a lower graded position, mm-hmm. and they're filling higher graded areas of responsibility. So the intention of this is to right size it so that in this particular case, for like the Guam Police Department, you'll have a law enforcement officer one, police officer one, which is your trained police officer two. So it's reallocating the title. Your PO2 and your PO3 will probably be known as what they call a PO4 or 5, right? So what it is that some things are going to be changing in the nature of how we look at the positions. So what will happen is that if you're a PO3 and there's a certain restriction, meaning you shouldn't be holding like levels where you're doing specialized services, that would be reserved for like your special agent 1, special agent 2. So what we're going to look at is that traditionally your PO1s would be going through an apprenticeship, and what we're hoping to see is that it's not just the police department, and Guam Customs just started their apprenticeship as well. We just got approved. So what we're hoping to see is that we establish an apprenticeship, and if we can't rightly establish an apprenticeship, we establish a program that's similar so that it gives you pretty much similar numbers of training hours that must be met. Going back to the position where you're saying if the CQ, the PO 2 or 3, if they're already doing specialized investigative type taskings, then that would probably be, I guess, delivered through like a desk audit. So, you can't fault the guys for overfilling things that really shouldn't be done at a PO2 level. It should have been done at a PO3 or maybe even higher level. But because of the necessity, because of the shortfalls we're currently facing, we task sometimes even our entry-level guys, because we don't have any other resource, to start doing these things. So what this hopes to accomplish is that it does create an absolute standard as far as if you're going through this system and you're self-competing, a fully tenured craftsman would be probably a new position called a PO4. But in the LEO force structure, that will convert to an LEO 7 position, because when you come into the law enforcement career field, you're coming in as an LEO 1 trainee or an LEO 2 trainee or an LEO 3 trainee. When you graduate there, you go into your core competencies and initial training with your law enforcement agency, which could entail you're going through an apprenticeship program or some kind of program that allows you to develop your core skills. And sometimes that takes a year or 2 years. So what we've done is that in consideration of you attaining a certain level of skill, we promote you so that, at the same time you're like, hey, I feel like I'm valued. I'm not stuck at a police officer level 1 after I graduated. I have the opportunity to promote into 2 more levels where I can get the full operating capacity of the core competencies that I need. And when I talk about core competencies, I'm talking about like patrol, right? Powers of arrest, all these things that are just basic law enforcement to the police department. Then you have detectives, you have canine handlers. Those are like special skills. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop like a level 1 and a level 2 so that those guys too, at the end of the day, are recognized for it. And then after you're done, and let's say you're done with being a detective or a canine handler, the next position you can go into would be, I think, what you guys call your sergeant. So then there's like career opportunities. So those positions that I just mentioned now are known as competitive. Everything else below it is self-competitive, and I'm not going to say automatic promotion, but it sort of clears up the avenue so that I, as an entry-level guy, know that in 5 years I can aspire to at least get below the rank of special agent, because I know that what I'm doing is helping me in my career. The traditional organization as it sits was fine up to a certain point, but the reality is that we don't really conduct promotions whenever it's necessary. What this actually forces us to do as leaders is to ensure that we have a system in place and that it allows for automatic promotions. If you met time and grade, time and service, you completed your career development course or your apprenticeship course, and you're ready. So there will be some changes. Shane?
Yeah, I mean, if I could try to add to what Chief Harris is saying. Yeah, I think looking, and if I misunderstood what the presentation was, I think looking at the details in that sense, nothing's hammered down as to how the employees will be affected right now. I'm understanding this is kind of a guide to show where the end result might be, right? But it's going to require a lot of input and work in each department to come up with what Major Chong was saying, right? How it's going to actually affect your ranks, right? So a lot of that's going to be developed in-house and I think incorporated into how each department can be served by the proposal. That's what I'm understanding.
And you know, okay, go ahead.
Just stand correct, Vice Chair, our Fire Chief Benzonia. Chief, if I can understand, it's a proposed, but it's up to the department to create whatever it is that they have, like agents and who qualifies under the agent program and the apprenticeship program. If I stand corrected, Shane?
In a sense, what Chief Harris is saying is that you had to use the benchmark. So
Yes.
the comparison of the positions, right?
Yeah,
But-
so when we go through the actual law enforcement force structure, you're not gonna be looking at PO1, PO2, PO3, you're gonna be looking at what we call LEO4, LEO5. So now it's a general, generic term which utilizes the facets and the job specifications of the police department as a benchmark.
They meet the competencies.
And there are competencies at every level, but just keep in mind that the competencies can be amended, changed, depending on your agency. You can add, you can take away, but the general rule of thumb would be found in the document that hopefully at the end of the day, when we vote, it's a general document that identifies that we now have, for the government of Guam, a law enforcement force structure that people can utilize as a benchmark instead of being kind of confused as to where to look to compare your positions to. The force structure actually gives you a guide.
Okay, so another question I have, and this might be for you, Shane. For instance, you know, we have we have officers that are in specialized units. You know, after a while they get burnt out, so we have to put them back out on patrol. So, looking at the special agent and special agent 2, there's a actual the pay structure there. If we were to take them off that assignment and reassign them back to patrol or somewhere else, okay, and their rank is a PO3, do they lose that pay?
No.
No, the patient remains.
Pay should remain.
And I think that discussion will have to lead us down the path of, we're looking at generalized job titles versus specific, right?
Right.
So as this evolves, right, I think the intent is to have, and correct me Chief if I'm wrong, right, to have all departments use law enforcement
A
officers.
standardized.
So if that's the intent and where the commission wants to go with it, the mechanics of how people move in and out of the LEO positions will be determined by the commission,
I mean,
right?
we're way far from that right now.
Yeah, we're like step 1 or 2, and that's 25.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand that already.
Probably look 10 miles down the road.
Well, I think, if I may, this is Tony Blossom, the East Office, you go from a special agent onto patrol, right? But his level of patrol will be a high-level patrol officer, like a master, or where they have competencies that's higher than the regular patrol officer out there. So he should be able to, based on his pay, he should be able to take the work based on his pay and be seen as that. Now, for the AG's office, I mean, we're not gonna have investigators in our office, of course, and I apologize to all the different law enforcement officers. Most of our investigators come from the different agencies, and they hit the ground running.
So you're the reason why we
and
have
their
this.
tier is not, they're gonna be in the yellow tier, not in the, not in the entry level tier, or anything like that. So I think for future, documentation is like, questions like, issues like what, Major Tom brought up, where a person is moved from special agent to patrol, that should be, you know, documented in this structure here, saying that it doesn't
And the
change the
reasons.
pay, however,
So-
they still meet the.
Yeah. So one of the
responsibilities
things,
are still there.
so one of the things I've noticed is like if you take a look at the military model, right, and I'm going to use the enlisted force structure as a sample. If you go into an area and they don't talk about special skills, but you do earn special skills. But let's say you transfer out that one area and let's say you're at E7 or E8. They're not gonna say, hey, because you're going back to something simpler, we're gonna demote you. So I think that these are the things that in moving forward, we just have to kind of like help spell out. But Major Chong, in between now and there, the first step is to get the force structure, and then like the devils normally are in the details. So this is like the initial planning document. The way I see this is this document is probably going to grow, and it'll have a lot more appendix attached to it. And then in moving forward, every agency is going to have to come out with guys who will help design the career development courses. The Department of Administration is going to have to collaborate with us. We're going to have to work with the Civil Service Commission. And this is not something that's going to happen overnight, but it's kind of like in years in the making because it's necessary. There are so many changes worldwide, and that we kind of don't want to be left behind. We want to be proactive in ensuring that the future generations of law enforcement, they come in and they feel like they're valued. I mean, especially now, today's generation is different from the generation that many of us grew up in. Now, it's more like they're into technology. They're more, chances are they're more readily available to lead the agency, not like us. We suffered through many indignities in growing up in their careers, but these guys, they don't have any problem in just leaving. So hopefully with this being developed, we're able to fill that gap.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay, so that brings me to the conclusion of this.
Can we get a copy of this PowerPoint?
Yes, I can. Yeah, thanks. Before I continue, I wanted to have give Shane Nagata the opportunity to probably discuss, and he touched on it already on what we can expect in moving forward. And just to reiterate, this is not something that's going to be simply done overnight. Baby steps and then milestones and stuff like that. So, Shane.
Yeah, so, I know Francis has been attending the meetings, right? Pretty much every time he comes back, our directors asked us to keep track of the progression of this project. So, we kind of dove into everything that's being proposed, right? And in speaking with him, we tried to come up with what are some of the major questions, right, to kind of get this going, right, that DOA would have. And one of the things that, I'll only bring up three that kind of strike us, right, when looking at the path forward. One of the things that, we were wondering is this is going to take a lot of time, investment of time and resources, right, from every agency that's this is going to affect, right? So the question we always get is, in looking at this model of consolidating the force structure, right? Does it work best for every agency, right? Because with every model, right, there's pros and cons, right, with how they work, right? For us, we can't answer that question, so that's why it's a question for us, right? And and we take it from a, recruiting standpoint, what things that have worked in the past, things that haven't, right? I think in discussing with Chief Perez, we talked about the existence of a cadet before, but we don't utilize it now. It's evolved to a trainee, right? There are differences in getting the law enforcement training prior to coming on board as an employee versus now there's a set of academies, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can do this, right? So one of our questions was, for the departments, especially for the ones we hire for, right? If it works best for the departments, then of course we're going to put work into it to try and get it done. One of the other biggest things that always fall on questions with us is timing, right? And I know Chief Harris touched on, there's always lags between promotional cycles, right? And I know this aspect of it isn't totally in our control as agencies, but we know that budget plays a big role, right?
Yes.
Budgeting for it, right? And what Francis and I tried to do was sit down and look at the model of promotions and how they work, right? Maintaining merit inside that system, right? And how the budget plays into it. One of the examples we got was, let's say we progress and we institute this model, and let's say within a cycle, right? You have 30 people that are moving up within the cycle, but budget only gives you 20, right? One of the things, there's a system internally that has to be executed, right? And there's a lot of similarities, right? Like with any system, you have panels that take care of things, but that's far down the road. But what we were looking at is these are questions on the investment of time, right? Because when I spoke to Chief Perez, we were like, hey, how long would this take? How long would this actually take to put together? And we're understanding this is a roadmap, right? But it takes anywhere from, I think, Chief, you said, 3 to 5, what did you say before you retired? 3 to 5 years, right? And because it's going to require changes in job specs. It's going to require changing current classified employees' titles. Some people are okay with that, some people are not. They like to maintain their current title, right? And there's a lot of dynamics in that will eventually end up in some sort of process, right? But if we plan it out properly, right, and there's buy-in from every agency at all the levels, that's where the key is. There's a ton of work statutorily that needs to be done, a ton of work, right? Francis and I kind of looked at it and said, hey, this, like Chief said, this is not something that will happen next year, right? We have our own mandates to do it, and we have to consider, right, a lot of our agencies are going through promotional cycles right now. We have a lot of training cycles that are coming up, academies being established. So looking at all that time frame, it's almost like we got to plug this thing in a short gap between everything that's going on. And that's what we're looking at. Is it possible? Yeah, any model is possible, right? And I'm sure at that point in time, depending on whatever barriers might be in the way statutory, the commission will have to come forward and make that recommendation to the legislature, right? To kind of make everything go. But that's, as far as steps moving forward, that's kind of where we're at. And, just to say that it will require a lot of effort from every agency. If the effort's there, and as free as we can do with our schedule, right, I did tell Chief Harris, we can commit to the technical side of things, right? Well, the points of what needs to be done, but it'll take a while to get through some of it. So as a brief, that's kind of where we're at for dealing.
Yeah. Thanks, Shane.
Basically, I guess to add to Shane is I think which is what we've kind of experienced for years is having a base, right, a full-time executive director and admin support staff. That's
For the commission.
For the commission, that'd be key in order to help to get us off the ground and continue on.
Can we hear that at testimony, maybe?
Yeah, no, that's true, because I know the commission doesn't have permanent staff, right? In our conversation, part of what we looked at for the evolution of this, right, there are post-certification requirements, right, that eventually will make its way into this force structure, right?
Yes.
That requires a whole other committee, right, to make sure that every agency's competencies are captured in any kind of force structure, right? But that needs a development separate of the force structure, separate of compensation, right?
Right.
So the force structure and the compensation are two totally different stories, right? One doesn't feed into the other necessarily, right? What we just did recently with updating the LEO kind of addresses compensation today. By the time this force structure is ready, the compensation structure may change. Like for instance, we have different differentials addressing specific issues in departments today. When this force structure is done, you know, an assessment of how each department is handling it may need to be done, and you may keep some of those, you may not, right? But that amount of work, right, to see if any option that we've done, like this pay update, we want to give it 1 or 2 years to see if it actually had the effect that we intended, right? Increasing recruitment and increasing retention, right? We won't know that until another 2 or 3 cycles, right? You can think of, yeah, to see if it really sticks, because we're losing a lot of people, right? So I think timing will be key in all of it, right?
Yeah.
Those questions will come up when I think they need to.
Chief Ignacio, so another thing I'll tell you just came up yesterday, getting the lower ranking officers to buy in to this concept of what's being discussed at this level, which is usually the management level. Right now, we're going through collective bargaining, we probably are too.
Yes.
So this is something that's getting pushed back. So it's not good. They're not breaking out the pom-poms and beating the drums or on this force structure. I'll tell you that from the police department's perspective. So that's another thing that we have to consider as we start to go down this road, or do we want to go down this road, or how far are we gonna push down this road? Because it's the pushback from that we're gonna get from the employees.
Existing
You know,
employees.
Is there a buy-in? Do they support it? Because right now, yeah, that's a whole different animal that I think all of us are dealing with, because we're now in collective bargaining mode, because DOC's doing it, you're doing it, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
DYA is doing it, you know, so we're and these are this is exactly some of the things that are being brought up in the proposed CBAs that we have. So there's pushback already, and there's different perspectives. Yeah, you talked about special agent, you know, they're talking about special pay, bilingual, bicultural, I don't know what else they're asking for. You know, those bargaining agreements, but you know.
And you're right, Chief, but you agree with what you're saying,
We're going through it paragraph by paragraph, you know, and we're on page 1 of like 60.
We've invited the representative from the GFT to attend the meeting, and he has the documents as well. And I've been talking with him on and off, you know, here and there. And I've seen the collective bargaining agreement that currently is set before the Guam Police Department. And they've got a lot of good ideas. I don't know, I mean, they sound like costly ideas, but
Yeah, that's the problem, a lot of costly ideas. And if you look at it really, a lot of it ties to money.
yeah.
They want specialty paid for this, special paid
Right,
for
right,
that.
yeah.
Special
I mean, at the end of the day, we have to sit down
paid for
as,
years of service, you know.
yeah,
Yeah, so.
at the end of the day, we have to come up with some kind of standard.
Like
right?
Shane said, you know, all those things that we're gonna be doing collective bargaining, how does that fit into this LEO structure? Does it really tie to money? Does it just tie to a concept, you know?
And I think only because it is prefaced with this, and it also affects the members of the post commission. I think our director, and we have to get around to it. Right, as far as the CBAs, you know, we are the servicing HR office, right? So when considering the CBAs, right, and I think our department did coordinate training on it, right? CBAs. So, you know, because we're all members of this commission, and that plays into everything that's going to be approved, we can meet with you guys to look at those, right? That's kind of what our director wants us to do. And we haven't gotten around to it just yet, but yeah, I mean, it definitely, if things like those issues are being brought up that may affect anything that we approve going forward for the
So in moving forward though, like the focus right now should just be on the force structure, because a lot of these things are very general in nature. It utilizes already pre-existing concepts, pre-existing benchmarks, so there really isn't too much of a significant change.
Yeah.
Now,
I think what will change is depending on what is being asked for negotiating in the CBAs, right? Because if the CBA gets executed and locks any department into something that affects the force structure, at a bare minimum, right? At a bare minimum. Because this will serve as the map, right? But when you whittle down to the nuts and bolts, that's where the CBAs will become involved, right?
Right.
just.
And of course, we will consider, whatever comes out of the collective bargaining agreements. However, like, the main intent right now is to just move forward, because we were given a mandate to create a law enforcement force structure. And so primarily, the main, focus is not to look at the CPAs, it's to develop a force structure, in line with the mandate that tells us to do so. So we move forward, we adopt, the force structure, and of course, will there be, little, stumbling blocks along the way? Obviously. But if you let that interfere with your capability to move forward and progress, then we're never gonna get anywhere. And then we're gonna say we might as well not even have done the force structure. But I'm reiterating that, we were given a mandate to follow, and I understand that, like, right now, the post commission is kind of, hurting as far as, like, gaining any traction in other areas as far as, post commission issues. But we're working on fixing that. We're hoping to get like a full-time executive director, and we're also looking to establish, full funding to allow us to be able to get additional personnel, equipment, and maybe even an office space. But we are working on that, actively, and, everybody understands right now from your own respective agencies that when you're in a quasi, commission that only meets, so many times in a quarter, and then we have to meet like this for subcommittee meetings, a lot of things kind of like, take a while to develop. So, a lot of love time, a lot of pain, but if we don't do this, we're not gonna meet the mandate. But, these are interesting points that, of course, I'm writing down, and as we progress forward, once we're done, we can try and mitigate whatever we can moving forward. So,
Mr. Chair,
sure.
just for the record, because you mentioned the mandate, just to update, me and maybe some of the other people in the mandate, is there a due date that you're supposed to present this?
I think we're given a year, which is October, to adopt a force structure.
October 2022, you sure?
September 3rd.
September 30th, to adopt something, just by next month.
Yeah.
And
I don't think there's
understanding
anything that
Yeah.
says that they're not going to entertain it,
yeah,
but, I think it's important for us to at least show a deliverable. And once we show a deliverable, and we have like a general, plan on, what we're gonna do in moving forward, and identify, future benchmarks and, milestones that need to happen, we're well on our way. Because nobody really thought that a force structure would be, so complicated and, take up a lot of
Right.
time.
so my understanding of the discussion we had today is that, this force structure would be a great foundation to start with regards to entry level all the way up to, management level, right? All the different tiers. And again, each agency, like my agency, would have a different, I would say the start of the structure would be more towards the yellow part,
Yes.
the LEO 8, LEO 9
Right,
and above.
right,
So
right.
just want to make sure that when this is submitted to, when it's submitted, that there's a verbiage in it that's understanding that there's certain agencies that doesn't,
It doesn't restrict you to.
I'm restricted to have, requires me to have entry level, but basically allows me to hire at the LEO 8, LEO 9 level and above this. So that's what my input is for that, so.
Okay, that's,
Yeah.
so one of the things that, we have to also envision is that, when you look at the LEO 1 through 15, it's not gonna apply to every agency. So like small agencies or divisions of larger agencies, like, I'm gonna say like agriculture, right? Conservation. I'm thinking they have like 15 officers in total. You're not gonna see a commander at that level. More than likely, you would see, maybe the LEO 9, 10, 11, maybe even 12. But you won't see, so dependent on your agency, not every agency is gonna have LEO 1 through LEO 15, and you're not gonna have all of these different positions. But what this does do, it creates a general idea of where we could.
Yes, yeah, this would be a good foundation. Yeah.
So in line with what you're saying,
Yeah.
I think that, although it's understood, we may, need to just put some clarification verbiage in there.
In there that indicates that certain agencies, would start at a different level versus entry level.
Okay.
Based on their, how would I put it, their duties and responsibilities and the competencies that will match the structure that we're trying to develop today.
Okay. Got the note. Maybe one of the things we can do is, if you can turn to page 7, it's, of the law enforcement force structure graph. What you're looking at is, the current, force structure with GTD, where you see the training, and then you see no position, and then there's a letter grade assigned, no position, letter grade assigned, police officer 1, 2, 3, sergeant 1, 2, lieutenant, and then no position, police captain, then another position not used, police major and colonel. What this force structure hopes to accomplish is to, when you move to the extreme right, it will incorporate 3 pay grades for the training, taking into consideration your ballet and college education. Then in your second level, which is your apprenticeship tier, this is the tier where you start to learn and master your duties and responsibilities. And what they call the full performance level of your core competencies is your LEO 7. Then we come into the next tier where you see that Sergeant 1 and Sergeant 2 actually have been moved several levels higher. So we're looking at creating a specialized 1 and a specialized 2, and then a Sergeant 1 and a Sergeant 2. So the Sergeant 1 moved from the current pay grade of LL1, for example, down to LPL1. And what that does is that it kind of reallocates, and hopefully for those guys who are in these positions, a lot of times the supervisor positions don't want to promote because they're not making any overtime, for example, and their pay is limited. And yes, there was a case study that was done in January, and hopefully that helps to mitigate some of the pay differences. But what this is doing is like, it's creating a much more solid tier.
Chief, if I could just to clarify, right? You see in this chart, right? You have the current pay grades and the proposed NEO grades, right? So the way we determine those, right? We use the Hay method of job sizing, right? And Chief participated in our exercise back.
What was that method again, sorry?
The Hay method.
Okay.
Right, so that's how we job size every position, right? And you'll see that there's a direct correlation in most agencies, right, between duties, responsibilities, right, and whatnot. You know, in our discussions, right, it's kind of, there's a bridge to gap between the two methods, right? And so one of the questions that always comes up is, you know, how do we maintain that the integrity of the position, it's in the pay grade and whatnot, right? You know, we use the Hay method. It's been used since '91. We were trained a lot of it, right? In 2008 and 2014. So going forward, right? And this goes back to what the chief was saying, was in every agency, right? It's sized up where it needs to be sized up, right? In pay grades. Are there gaps? Yes, there's definitely gaps in agencies that can be filled, right? But that's where there's a lot of work internally with the agency. If you'll see the pay grades goes F all the way up to T, LEO 1 all the way up to LEO 15, right? When it gets down to this area for every agency, right? It's going to be crucial that the documentation and the input from every agency is there. A transition, if we approve a transition out of the Hay method, basically the commission will be responsible for a job section, right? You know, guiding, you know, with BOA here, guiding play. the onus is gonna be on the commission to approve, right? This will affect directly what every classified employee is graded at, right? So the only reason why I'm bringing it up is because it served as the basis for all of our classification systems since '91. There's other systems out there. I mean, Hayes not, the latest and greatest, but it is established, right? So I just want to bring the point up so that going forward in our mindset, kind of like how you're plugging the investigators into a certain range, every department's going to have to do that for themselves and meet together and ratify the force structure in the future. Right, and so we'll be here to kind of walk through it with everyone, but that's kind of where it stands, and it's a big transition. Like Chief Ignacio said, there's gonna be some people that don't want to let go of what's already here, because it's familiar and it might be safe for them. But going forward in the next steps, I mean, that's going to be a critical part of the success of any structure that you want to achieve into.
But yeah, I agree with you, Shane, very good explanation, but I agree that also with you, Chief, Mr. Chair, that we need to develop the foundation first before we start getting into the
and I think that's what we're
individual agency areas, requirements.
Chief Dave Fison from DYA. I think we're all on the same track. Overall, we're looking at it from a holistic, at a macro level, but we're also here individually as departments. So, we're trying to really set the foundation overall as the post commission on what we're requiring for all LEOs across the board. And once we get that uniformity, that's when internally each of the departments can start proposing their structure within that to now start tracking who's going to be my LEO 1, 2, and 3 within DYA and who's already actually above those levels. That aim to classify them, like you said, at a yellow to a green level, and that'll be internal. But I think this starting phase for us is starting to at least show that we have something to work with and to literally grow and evolve, because we have too many things that are moving forward, whether we're going to require education to be an accredited education to ensure that the degree is not just coming from anywhere saying, okay, I'm suitable for something else. So those are the fine-tuning portions of this overall vision that we have as a commission that we're actually putting together overall to ensure that we're actually fair and equal across the board, from UIA, even doing a lateral transfer over to GPD, which is not uncommon, or even to DOC, vice versa. So how do we do that is going to be question marks, and eventually it's going to come aboard. But there's overall foundation for us to establish something that, as a line agency also, comparing with an autonomous agency, those are the things that we throw into our actual decision-making process overall. And the comparison of saying something in the military from an E1 to an E9, we're actually a little bit more involved with this force structure because we're going from an E1 to an O10, including officers that become commissioned, and not necessarily those that are enlisted, but the requirements are going to be that substantial, so that if I get an E1, congratulations, you're LEO 2 and 3, but at the same time, he already has a degree, and we have to look at how we're going to consider that individual to boost up to an LEO 7, 8, and 9. We're going to consider the factors that we're saying is going to be education level or service already under their belt, years of service. So those are the things, and those are the factors that we're all establishing. I think we're a good start as a commission that we're proposing this structure to reassure that, we're actually getting ourselves falling in line.
I think we have to also please be aware that even though a person has a degree, right? What can that person meet the competency for that
position?
So I like what David said about like when you have somebody with a degree, and so the intent is not to just automatically promote somebody because they have a degree. That's the reason why you have what they call an apprenticeship tier. So if you have an apprenticeship tier, what they do is that they have to learn how to walk before they run. So, in other words, when it comes time, because they already have in hand, in their pocket, a degree. So in like 5-6 years.
Are you likely to be able to complete competencies, right?
Yes. And in like 5 or 6 years, when there's a supervisory opening, then they can compete. Because the intention is not to give you things on a silver platter. You still have to work for it. So what that does is that it opens up the opportunity for people who came into law enforcement with a degree or who are aspiring to get their degree. It gives them the opportunity to say, look, in 4 years I should be done with my apprenticeship. And I know that this position is gonna be opening up. I'm planning my own career. I'm not waiting for you or you to plan my career. If I know what I want, and I'm really proactive about making sure that I take care of myself and my family, and I have a good paying job, I'm not gonna be one of those guys relegated to stay at the LEO 3 or LEO 4 level for 30 years. I'm gonna tell myself that I wanna make a difference. I wanna leave things better than when I walked in, and I'm trying to make things a whole lot smoother. I mean, take a look at your organizations. You walk in and you see a lot of gaps, and then you say, what can I do to fix this? A lot of times we are so energetic when we start, and then at the end of so many years, you're pounded because the reality is that it doesn't conform to what you want or what you need. So going to the force structure, it's developing a framework. Right now, we don't really have a framework. The framework is only through the Department of Administration's personnel rules and regulations and the law that guides the government agencies on developing positions. And this one actually creates a framework. It's better than, yeah. So in moving forward, it's going to fix some of the gaps. It's not going to fix all of the gaps. And it's in moving forward that as we develop, that's the reason why we needed the expertise of both the Department of Administration and the Civil Service Commission in moving forward. And that's why we were told to collaborate to make sure. But in collaborating, we got to make sure that we're doing it as a team. It's not one way. Meaning, I'm not going to keep giving Shane and Francis, this is what I need, this is what I want. It's more like, hey, you can't do this, can we do this? We can't. I know there are certain levels of expectation, but the reality is that whatever product we come with, at the end of the day, is going to be the product that we're going to present. So I am taking notes, and then if anything, we can always talk a little bit more. You go to page 8, it basically tells you that it'll tell you which positions are competitive or non-competitive, what career training requirements must be met, what other educational requirements can be met. So all of these things are things that, retrospective to your own agency, if there's certain things that you need to add in, you're welcome to do so. But if it's something that you can work with as part of the force structure that we can move at a later date, then obviously you're welcome to do that. Going on to page 9 is the first part of the tier, which is your awareness and basic competencies. And it shows you basically what I had in the previous pages. And so these competencies are things that you could add or take away, but I took this from the OPM's competencies list. And then the next page, on page 10, is the journeyman tier, which is your full performance competency. So this is where, if you were to follow the career development course and the apprenticeship all the way to its fullest at the end of your tenure, you'd be fully capable of doing all your core competencies. Next page is page 11, which is your supervisory specialized duties tier. And as I said earlier, this is like your first line specialized duties, and then your Sergeant 1 and Sergeant 2s. Then the next one on page 12 is your force structure leadership executive / strategic vision tier. These are where your police captains and police major and the police colonel will be identified. This is your strategic tier where you're planning for the agency that you're working for. Going on to page 13, this is the actual breakdown per LEO level. So on page 13, starts off with LEO 1, and the GP benchmark is the police trainee, high school diploma / GED. This is no different from the LEO 2. The only difference between the LEO 2 and the LEO 1 is that you're still training. However, you have a basic law enforcement academy certificate under your belt. Then go to the LEO 3. It's the same position, however, we have 60 credits or a bachelor's degree. And what I did was I just took all the benchmark positions from the Guam Police Department and utilized that as the requirements for each of these positions. Going on to page 19 is the LEO 4, which is where you start your apprenticeship and you do your journey work throughout the next several years. So the benchmark position is the police officer 1 position. So you notice now it's the PO1 would be known as an LEO 4. So everything dealing with the minimum experience and training and necessary special qualifications is taken directly out of the job specifications for the police department position. Then when you go to the next, go to page 22 is your LEO 5 journeyman. Same thing. Then go to your go to page 27. You notice I put a highlight there. LEO 7 is your master craftsman, and the GP benchmark would have to be developed. But what I did was I took a look at what was in the LEO 6 and then started making some minor adjustments to allow for a generalized, much more given allowance so that you would have to acquire a little bit more time to reach the full performance level.
So, Mr. Chairman, so the LEO 4 all the way to LEO 7, that's a non-competitive type of positions?
Yes.
Positions, right?
Yes. So what that allows you to do, and I know that Shane said earlier about budgets, but we, in moving forward, it's kind of like you weigh the lesser of the 2 evils.
Right.
And when you're taking a look at certain positions, certain guys in every agency are doing more than what their position calls for. And it becomes very difficult when we don't normally open up announcements for promotions. What this does is that it creates a mechanism which allows for us to be able to move forward, greases the wheels just a little bit. And yes, I understand it's a matter of funding, but these are new times. We're making changes.
Basically, it's a good way to recognize people who are officers who are working hard and working and improving their competencies and their mastering their job, and award them by giving them a non-competitive promotion.
Right, and it's not automatic because you play some part as a person in this. So if I decide I don't really want to do this,
It's a performance evaluation that will determine that if I can meet that. So.
Okay, going over to page 30, now we're entering into the supervisory / specialized operational competence tier. And under LEO 8, this is where I was telling you that we are looking at creating 2 positions for your specialized areas, a level 1 and a level 2, which allows you to be able to, once you know your core competencies and you're going into a new area, like I'm going to use K9 or or investigations, it allows you to learn, in addition to your core competencies, specialized areas. And so in these areas, you're gonna have to graduate from school, receive certification in order to qualify for it. And this also is competitive. It is not a given. So the only non-competitive promotions were the ones from the LEO 7 on down. Anything above that is competitive. And this is where, like, if you have a degree, it will come into play. Once you do your core competencies and you say, man, I want to do that, I want to be an investigator, I want to be a canine handler, your degree comes into play. But it mostly comes into play when it comes time for the actual supervisory, Sergeant 1, Sergeant 2, Lieutenant Captain, Major Colonel.
Chief, I have a question, Shane. With the implementation of this, just going on my question, our Chief Mantaloni. My question is, with the existing personnel on board at their rank and file position as is, the adoption of this into the commission, would it validate a grandfathering system in place?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I think in Chief Perry's right, you can help me on this.
Because we're moving now rank and file to another level above what they exist.
So is the intent with this, I guess the intent to, if it's voted to adopt this model, right? Would the intent be to, it wouldn't be to adopt these descriptions in particular, right? And the only reason why I'm asking is because as we go through it, this reflects a lot of GPD right now. Yeah. But I know it's going to need to reflect facets of each organization, right?
So what I've done is that in areas where it seemed like it was just GPD centric, I generalized the terminology. So instead of like saying, I don't know, let's say police function specific, it was like law enforcement, then generalization.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I'm asking it, because I'm looking at it from a technical standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Once this is adopted and it goes to the legislature, right? Because I think the statute says it's for them to review and consider. Let's say they pass something that ratifies it, and if this is an attachment to it, they ratify these job specs, it becomes statutory, right? Which means the commission can't change it. Right, so the structure, and I see what Chief Perry did, right? Did generalize it to try and capture the law enforcement duties, generally, right? Yeah. But to answer your question, that's where that would take place, any grandfathering, because two ways it can be done, right? I mean, I think the idea, right, Chief, is to move everyone eventually into these LEOs. Yes. But you're right, Chief, there are going to be some people that be like, no, I just want to stay in my current position and retire that way, or for whatever reason, right? I think at that point, this commission is going to have to decide how that transition is going to happen, right? Which is something that hopefully we don't get tied up in the submission to the legislature. So yes, this is a good working example of what Chief Perry said to generalize it. There probably will, usually when we do this, right, because we have the same issue when we hire engineers, right? There's mechanical, electrical, civil, all that. Yeah. So what we do is we capture all of that in one job spec for each level, right? So when we hire an engineer 1, we detail out which one's mechanical, which, what you're looking for. So when we announce it, we say engineer civil, right? We don't just say engineer, we say engineer civil. So when you apply for it, you already know where it's going. Right. That might be a little bit different with this because it takes incorporates a lot of agencies. So it's
I'm thinking that in moving forward,
I think
it's like generalizing like LEO corrections.
It could be LEO corrections and the job spec, which is going to take all, you can consolidate it into like, the lower level EOs won't be too much of an issue because as it stands right now, they all kind of same grade. It'll be these strategic positions where you start having to detail things out. That we could start to differentiate, right? Because a lot of the ones that patrol and do what do you call it, investigations and whatnot, those kind of handle themselves.
Yeah, because it does differentiate the difference of the tier.
Right, and getting into the more complicated positions, that's where you'll start having to detail it out, right? Because when they're recruited for, right, that's where the differences lie, right? But yeah, so, and then I guess it's important, and the only reason why is because I've seen things like this end up in a legislative approval, and then our hands decide, we can't change it.
Right, they turn to you guys.
Yeah, and then they're like, well, no, say
Guidance.
anything, and we're like.
So I'm thinking that in moving forward, one of the things that we do is put a provision that allows for amendments to be made to tailor in respect to each law enforcement.
Right, and I think that should be part of the going forward.
Yes, yeah, I was gonna
Yeah, this
recommend that,
service
don't generalize,
basis.
but for specific
Specific,
wordings
right.
for
Right.
each agency, yes.
But, you know, like in moving forward, the reason why, so what I ended up doing was making sure I had to generalize it, because I understand that we're up against the clock. You know, I mean, it doesn't matter, once you start, it's like, you're gonna find all these technical things. I'm not a policeman, I'm a fireman, I'm not this, I'm that, I don't do this, I do that. But if you create a general, set of responsibilities, you can tailor it. So I'm thinking that, in moving forward, that provision to allow amendments as necessary to tailor, I'm not sure how to put the verbiage together, but if they do this and they do a cut and paste and they say, okay, this is law, the provision in there should allow the commission, Department of Administration, or civil service, or whoever the entities are, to be able to make, changes as necessary.
So I think this is supposed to serve as a base, right, for the discussion, right? It's a
Yes.
starting point, right, the general job spec that, depending on how the commission wants, can evolve. Yeah, I think it's worth saying that in when we get to the legislature, but I also think it's, worth, what do you call it, acknowledging the fact that, each agency is meant to give the input for the job specs going forward. And, in the submission to the transmittal to the legislature, that it be clearly stated for their record, right, that these, not that it's illustrative, what do you call it, illustrative in nature, but it's intended to show how the force structure is supposed to pan out, right? Because a force structure on a chart, and then this kind of digs into where it's going. Because you're right, with the four tiers can change depending on how law enforcement changes, right? Basically, so. Yeah, and then my main concern was that we just don't get locked into a job spec if the legislature ratifies something in law, right? Because that'll cause a lot of issues going forward.
Yeah.
And then the transition for classified employees, I think, you know, if this is the force structure that goes through, that transition shouldn't be mandated. I think what maybe should come out of the commission is a target for the legislature to consider. Like, if we were to try and get all these job specs in circulation and people transition within even 2 years, that would be very difficult, because we're gonna go through a lot of changes, right?
Yeah.
But I think as a team, if we decide, as a commission, we decide, hey, you know, this amount of time is feasible to at least start the conversation, because there's gonna need to be an education campaign behind it in all the agencies.
Yeah.
Right, if that's what's gonna go through. So, yeah, just something to look at, because, yeah, it is basic, Chief, you're right, you did generalize it, and already from all the announcements that we do, I was looking at, you know, there are specific things that go into certain announcements, for agencies. Yeah, it's just my take on this, but yeah, thanks for the question. Referencing it.
Let's go to, and what I'm doing is I'm moving through this because I'm hoping that at the end of the day, you guys will be able to actually do a little bit more review, and then maybe tomorrow we can actually go through and if you have any specific questions or requests for input, we can visit it as appropriate. Page 38 is the LEO Officer 10, which is supervisory. And I just put in yellow highlight that these officers are transitioning from team leaders to first line supervisors as leaders of operational competence. These officers assist leadership in managing day-to-day operations, and officers must complete the Government of Guam basic supervisory reports. These are junior officers who are responsible for ensuring mission capabilities are carried out and daily tasks are accomplished. In order to qualify for position, officers must have successfully completed 60 credits in CJPA or demonstrated equivalent knowledge experience. And like I said, this is more like it was generalized and taken from like the police department positions, but there is an allowance for each agency rate to be able to tailor it.
Yeah.
But we do need to come up with some sort of general, structure so that, in moving forward, there's something that you can compare to.
You know, like, Chief, I just want to share, like ARF. ARF actually, the certifications that we actually obtained, that's equivalent to an AA and a BA is what we consider Pro Board certifications. And apparently that's where I'm alluding to. What we're seeing here are, you know, your degrees, all that. But the aircraft rescue is recognized nationally through Pro Board, and also that's civilian. Now, in the military area, as firefighters, it's called IFSAT. And so that's what I'm alluding to, that this thing equivalents to your bachelor's and your CJs, and, you know, this is where, because Pro Board 4 is equivalent to a master's, okay? And that's, I want to introduce that and just let the commission know that that's where the aircraft rescue actually lies on for any certifications.
So I'm thinking, it sounds like what you're looking at doing is like, if you have an equivalency to a certain degree, that it should be considered.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And can we do that, Shane? Is it possible
Well,
to?
I think, and then I kind of touched bases in this, right, long way down the road.
Right.
Right, what, I think, what we may need to do, right, is tie these things into the post-certification, right? Because every agency is gonna have its own, certifications, right? It's that board for fire, right? Customs has its own certifications, right? Specialty units, K9 and all that, right? So, at some point, not right now, because it's not.
Yes.
But, you know, post-certifications, for the purposes of these positions, I think will standardize how people get to which tiers and which levels, right? It's a long conversation,
Right.
but when we looked at it, that's the only consistent way, right? So let's say you had matching the tiers, post certification level 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? How you attain a post certification level will be dependent on how an employee progresses in each department. Those can be given from the department to post to include as, okay, post will now certify you as a level 1 post.
Right.
So that captures everything you want to do, everything the AG wants to do, DOC, GPD, but it's all into one single cert. That's a long way from now, that's a long conversation from now.
Yes.
But,
Well, in order to get there, we need to
We gotta
build
establish,
positions.
right.
yeah, exactly,
Establish a commission first.
exactly, so that was why Francis said that we need a permanent executive director.
Yes. And we agree, and we're working towards that, and it's just,
Yeah.
things don't happen quickly.
Yeah, you know, it's just a process that we have to go through, right? But yeah, I mean, in the end, I mean, I think that's kind of how you acknowledge every department's differences, right? And I think that was the mission for folks in the beginning anyway, so, yeah, I think that's how we address it in the future. But going forward, these job specs are gonna be key, right, going forward, if they certify.
Yeah.
The purpose of transition.
Yeah, that's why I generalized as much as I could, areas that were police-centric. I had to generalize it by using words like law enforcement, and then trying to generalize the intent of what they were trying, or what was identified in the job specification. And of course, I recognize that there are certain entities, you know, like the fire department is a little different, ARF is different. But that's the beauty of us sitting together, is that
Yes.
in collaborating, we know that this is not a cookie cutter approach. Nothing really ever is. However, like I said, it just develops a framework that allows us in moving forward to be able to develop something that is much more appropriate for today's age and time, especially since times have changed many years ago. So I wrote down what you said, and maybe you and I can discuss this thing on the Pro Board and what are the
Yeah, we'll take it in. I just wanted to share that with the commission.
Yeah, but that's why I'm saying that in moving forward, that's the reason why it's important that we sit down, we dive through this thing, deep dive, not just casually read through it. That's why I'm going through each separate law enforcement officer position, because if there are certain things as we move forward, we can discuss it. Otherwise, at the end of the day, when we get to the last few positions, we can break then come back tomorrow, to finish off and, then do our closing inputs. So anyway, moving forward, page 41 is the law enforcement officer 11 position, and the GP benchmark is police sergeant 2. As I said, using the benchmarks, these are all pretty much like similar to what you'd find in the job specification, including the minimum experience and training and special qualifications, education requirements. Next position is found on page 43, which is the law enforcement officer 12 position. The benchmark is the police lieutenant, and same thing. Everything is pretty much the same. I generalized areas that were police-centric in nature, but in moving forward, we can change and make certain provisions to allow much more looser interpretation. Going to page 46 is the executive strategic vision tier. And again, this is also competitive, just like the previous tier. The law enforcement officer 13 position will be known as your police captain. And it's the same thing, it's competitive, it's managerial, and it is pretty much just taking the same provisions that were found in the job specifications. And one of the things I would like to state is that I think, if I'm not mistaken, at that time, it was mandated that certain education requirements were placed, right, for the police department. I know there were some issues with people saying, well, you shouldn't do that, but I think in moving forward, it just helps to enhance the commission's viewpoint that, you do need education, training, and certification. So I think in line with that, we're talking about transition time. So there should be, and I think it was grandfather, the word grandfather. You grandfather certain positions to be able to allow them, but then after a certain point in moving forward, there should be requirements. And the beauty of the Guam Police Department positions was that in their job specification, it tells you that we recommend, it's like we highly recommend that you start trying to get your higher levels of education out of the way. You don't really see that. I mean, even in customs, we didn't recommend that, but if we could, we'd include it. And what I'm seeing, at least in my agency, is that we have a higher number of people who graduate with degrees that are coming on board. So it's no longer the days of old where I came and I graduated from high school. We have a lot more well-educated people, and so in moving forward, this might not be a thing for them. It may be a thing for current tenured employees who don't have that. So I just thought I'd highlight that. Going to page 49 is your LEO 14, which is the benchmark of the police major. And it's the same thing, nature of work, illustrative examples, experience, training, and qualifications are all the same. And then you go to page 51 is the LEO 15, which is your benchmark positions, police colonel. Everything is pretty much the same, and it's competitive. So going to page 54 on back are the competencies that were taken from the OPM. These are just things that you could utilize for every position. What I did find was that in that OPM document, I can post that as well, and it actually shows certain competencies as they relate to entry level, supervisory, and managerial. So all I did was I did a review and inserted what I thought would be appropriate. It is not set in stone. You can go in there, assign additional, you can take away, you can create your own competencies, and in moving forward, once we're done, we'll have the framework in moving forward. So now I open the floor, if you guys have any questions, or need for clarification or discussion on anything, I open the floor.
I don't know, maybe to Shane and Francis here, like the LEO 1 all the way to LEO 15, right? But of course, we got firefighters also involved in these corrections. Is there, do you have any idea of another acronym to use for vice LEO? Or?
Yeah, I think the acronym, we can change that. I mean, holistically, right, it's all under public safety.
Yeah, public safety, maybe public
So,
safety.
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you know,
Yes,
So instead of LEO, it's PSO?
yes, public safety officer, public safety, well, I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I think at that point, if it's adopted, then the commission can change whatever it wants. Yeah, I mean, it can be called to incorporate, all
It's just
these-
syntax, just to, well, whoever reads this will understand that it's not just for people carrying a gun, but also people who, you know, who, uses a fire hose or, you know.
Easy on the fire hose.
You know what I mean?
But yeah, it's, since it's a commission,
Yeah.
you don't want to umbrella the entire
membership.
how we're gonna call it.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, I mean, if, depending on what it is, and yeah, you wanna make it as simple as possible, right?
As simple as possible.
We've got a lot of acronyms floating out there.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, I think.
I agree, yeah.
And public safety brings us back to
DPS?
the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah, DPS.
Or public safety, yeah.
Which is one of the models, we looked at back then, right, to see how it was.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations we had was, you know, Department of Public Safety incorporated everyone. Since then, right, the evolution was mandates change, right, mandates all change. Trying to bridge what's changed, right, because everything got spread out, right, then trying to bring it back in, it's a tough endeavor, right? So that's why when I was saying, you know, Chief Barrett, it's gonna take.
I mean,
some
our
of it.
plan is to umbrella everybody at one thing, and everybody at one page.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if I was to say LEO to the firefighters,
Right.
they're gonna turn around and say, wow.
And,
It's
and,
just for,
yeah.
yeah.
And I think that dynamic in every agency is gonna be what every agency has gonna have to deal with, right? Back to what Chief Steve was saying, right? You know, being that GPD is the benchmark and being that his requirements are statutory in nature, right? There's a lot more to deal with the GPD to, you know, consolidate everything in that sense, right? In the technical sense, right? Other agencies have more flexibility, like corrections can change whatever they need to change internally just by working with the commission and DOA and following all the current processes, right? But I think when it gets down to that point, and I think it's really inherent upon us to make sure that whatever the legislature is gonna improve, leave full flexibility to propose. Because,
To make changes.
yeah, if we have to recommend, you know, if the commission, let's say we need to change something statutorily down the road, and the commission wants to recommend language to propose a bill to change something, it'll go in the, you know, meat grinder and it'll come out to something, right?
The other concern to Shane, I would like to bring to the commission's attention is that, you know, being a line agency versus autonomous.
Right.
The autonomous agency, I answer to two, you know, of my bosses, but they answer to a board.
Right.
And then the board answers to,
And then the board maintains control over
Yes,
many
and
things
so-
that impact operation, right? So-
that's where the challenge is as
Correct.
being autonomous.
Correct, and there's a lot of statutory, and we had this discussion with Chief, right, there's a lot of statutory things we have to work through, right? And I think Chief Steve and I were talking too, right, about, there's whole branch of government that's incorporated in our conversation, right, the judiciary, with the marshals, right? It's a separate branch altogether that, you know, has its own mandates, right? And I think we also talked about port police, right, they have a mandate that kind of carves them out to do what they need to do.
Like
right?
the
So-
CPP over there.
Right, see, so there's a lot of spaghetti, is what I told Chief Parrish when we get to that point. And that's why I think keeping this as general enough while maintaining the shell of what needs to be done, so post can work inside of all of that, because it's a lot of stuff. And, you know, at that point, depending on how the legislature acts with a recommendation, that's when Francis and I told you, go down and be like, okay, let's start step one, what do we need to take care of, right? But, yeah, it's gonna be a longer process, that's gonna require commitment.
Can you also give one scenario that maybe the group could consider is that the Attorney General, based on statute, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is that they can appoint whoever they can as peace officers. basically. The problem that I see with that is that someone who gets appointed may not have the same kind of training, political training that they have, the experience that they have. But because the law allows them to do that, it can be done, so. I don't know, I think we should address that situation. I'm not trying to take any powers away from the Attorney General, but at least have him, there's some kind of guide where it says, yeah, I can do anybody who is qualified as a law enforcement or as an investigator.
And I think the key to that would revolve back around to post certification.
Right.
Because post certification is exactly that, right?
So don't they need to get like some kind of certification to post anyway?
Well, I don't know how the statute is.
He brings up a good point,
Yeah.
because I'm actually going right now to the AG's office and I'm asking for a legal opinion. So back in 1999, the AG's office wrote an opinion to the Guam Police Department that the detention facility guard is, by virtue of their duties and responsibilities as described therein, is a peace officer. So somebody decided to give them guns. So I have detention facility guards, I don't know if this holds true for you, but I have DFG guards that are running around carrying guns. But they are not recognized or covered under post commission, because under post commission it says detention facility officer, right? A DFO, not a DFG. So these DFG guards come in as a high school. The only requirement is a high school diploma. You come in, you get a job, and they give you a gun. Now, I haven't changed that only because of the 1999 ruling, which I'm asking the AG and I'm working with an attorney to do a review. So that's the other thing that is not considered here. We talk about LEO and firemen, but when we did the 18% pay raise,
They included the guard.
security guards, certain government agencies.
Yeah, like GMA security guards got it, yes.
GMA, no, not GMH. DME, Department of Military Affairs, they have gun carrying security guards.
And your detention officers.
Armed security guards, I think the airport, right? They have armed security guards, they got the 18%.
Even port police, right?
Port police has port
that-
security guards. These guys are armed, not post recognized or certified.
They don't collect evidence or make arrests, basically. Yeah.
But they got the 18%.
Sounds like something that we may have to,
I think
So are
we
they,
should.
are they LEO one? Because they don't meet the requirements of a post. Right, so where do they fit into this?
they would probably be LEO one because they're coming in and they're only high school recognized.
Yeah. So what you want to bring this in is from experience. When I first got into the Attorney General's office, there was an investigator who came from being a parapro at a school to becoming an investigator one. And that's because the Attorney General, based on their statutory powers, can appoint someone as a peace officer, right? So.
So sir, there's these other laws out there that.
They're gonna look at statutes that would affect us as law enforcement or even
Or-
public safety people.
And that's where, Shane, can I ask the question, Chief? Is there any way, I understand we, line agencies turn to the AG's office. We have a legal counsel, of course. But then at that, is there any way where the post commission actually, how can I say this in words? Have the power invested to actually say, yea or nay, these guys are not post certified, or they cannot be running around, with a gunsling at their hips and not being post certified.
Yeah, the first step is gonna be determining whether they're in the force structure.
Right.
First and foremost, right? I think the statute, but I think post has enough latitude within itself, right? But I think the statute to create the force structure gave us a category. The recommendation that comes out of the commission can, recommend what it needs to. But if the force structure is gonna be established and that transition of positions into the force structure, that's where you can handle that, right? Another question that came up is, the animal catchers, right? And, Department of,
Agriculture.
Right.
Yeah.
They're included in the compensation, but, categorically, right, in the class plan, they're not categorized, under public safety.
How do we correct that?
Yeah.
Is it through mandate or is it?
But that one's statutory, so that's why there's a laundry list of things that, depending on what the commission feels.
Reverend, sorry,
Oh,
Reverend
Reverend
Tax.
Reverend Tax.
The Criminal Investigation Bureau,
CIB, they're also their,
Yeah.
Weights and measures?
waste and measures also got the
Yeah.
80% raise, yes.
I was about to mention that, Chief.
So
Yes.
when they did the 40% way back when, everybody
They were
jumped on the
included.
bandwagon.
I think entomologist was.
Yes, I was about to mention that.
Entomologist, so, yeah, there were a lot of, policy calls from the
There's a lot of
legislature.
people that were jumping on the bandwagon.
Can you
Yeah.
pull the information on that, on all these people, you know, all the ones
So-
that
so-
that
so-
got included on these?
Oh, it's embedded in the public law.
They lobbied for it.
They lobbied for it, yeah.
So my question is, if we can, on spaghetti bits, can the commission, how can the commission get a grip to be the deputy
Have
of
good control of,
controlling
who's,
this? Because we don't want everybody keep jumping bandwagon
You
and.
have to fix the mandate.
Yeah.
So there's a mandate that's out there that establishes that an entomologist is part of the, law
You have to go back
enforcement
to the original.
classification.
Yeah, so,
You have to
so,
amend it.
Yeah.
so we need to go back out and
Right.
go to the legislature again for this.
well, maybe this is gonna be amended, can that be included in this?
Yeah,
So
so,
fast as a statute.
Yeah.
so the force
That defines
structure,
what an entomology is.
To add this in.
yeah, so the force structure is kind of your shell to make sure that you include what the post commission wants, right? There will be kickback from those employees, that are
course.
covered, right?
Yeah.
And more than likely at the time, if we do recommend a bill to be issued, right, to rectify these things, that conversation will take one.
I mean, we're not gonna take away what's already done.
No, no,
But
never.
to stop it,
Yeah.
to just stop
You
it.
give them
where-
a grandfather period.
Right.
And
It's
if you
grandfathered.
decide that you're just gonna stay,
Right.
then you, like, and you're already close to retirement, you just retire them out.
Yeah, and that's gonna be key if the commission wants to act that way. What's the solution to it? Because, I think if legislation is proposed or requested, it's easy to take it out, but how do you handle everything that's gonna come out of it, right? So, that would be key and they require more than one public hearing, everything.
Okay.
Discussion.
So these are very good ideas that we can add to the shelf. I mean, some of the things that we've seen statutorily are things that, even as a post commission, even if we had a solid group and, we were 100% of the time here, we couldn't really tackle it because it's a mandate. If it's a mandate, we have to undo the mandate. But if this flies, we can create certain provisions in there that could, amend certain statutes to allow, to fix, like what Chief Steve was saying, is, certain positions that need to be, corrected, and they're just high school.
Right, and then there's the bigger things, right, if it is the will of the commission to include the port, that requires mandate, right, to get the port comes back on the commission side, but, step by step, right, it's just a laundry list of things that, either will be brought up to be addressed or not, but I think as long as the structure is flexible enough, and the legislature gives the commission the authority to move forward on it, each department can be accommodated, internally within the commission. So. and I think
Dave,
that-
anything? You're, you look keenly interested.
And that's why we're just looking overall, because we're one of the agencies that's going up from our identification with our title as well, so, this is significant progress, but, we're not just, trying to be clear from our rank but also within the title within our officers that do arrest juveniles, but there's limitation within their job descriptions overall.
Right.
And I think an ask from DOA, once, everything's put forward, and if these job, the allocations to LEO or public safety, whichever way it goes, right? That within each of your agencies, right, getting input from everyone, right? And the only reason why I say that is because in the end, for those employees that don't agree, like the appeals will come down to us, right? But it is a project that's being mandated by the post and the law, right? But we'll need to have an answer, right? And we'll explain as best we can. But I think the more that they understand what's trying to be accomplished, more things can be hammered out, right? That's why I said the flexibility of the commission is going to be key, right? Hammering things out.
Yeah, highly unlikely, actually, Chief, I just want to introduce what was asked of me. Instead of the commission making it a vote for the commission to make this, they wanted to get involved in voting. I said, that's why they have a commission, to take care of this. And so my job is actually to educate you guys, show you a script, a video, and go through the slides, what this means. But in doing so, they really actually want to voice their opinion, not being negative about it, but with the ideas, and that's why I highly greatly to agree on this part of request. But then having to vote in the commission, I don't think that's gonna happen. But your ideas, we can rest assured, note them, it's noted, duly noted, and will be introduced. So everything I'm speaking on the behalf actually was brought up with officers that are not here, and representing my men and women of something to bring onto the post.
Well, you know that you can't, as a commission, you've got representatives who represent the interests of the law enforcement entity, and so you can't really put something out as a general thing for everybody to vote, because then it's going to get too convoluted and almost complicated to try and sort through, which is why whoever represents your agency, number one, should be collaborating with the appointing authorities and the head managers, and must be knowledgeable in matters dealing with personnel, promotions, movements, and such, so that way when they discuss it, they can articulate what this program is all about. Because when somebody comes to you and asks you, so Ray, what is this program about? You can articulate what it is, and then they say, oh, okay, I understand. And if they don't, then they say, okay, can I ask you a clarifying question? You're able to clarify it. Because, some people out there who may be part of the mass, they may not understand. They just take a look at it and they don't even bother to read the contents of the document, and then they already have an impression that no, it's not going to work for me. You need to grandfather me. I'm thinking that people actually took the time and they read it. They would see that there's nothing in here that really that is derogatorily aimed at kicking anybody out. It's more or less creating standards that would help solidify the post-commission's effort to be able to cross a certain chasm that we're at right now. So, in line with creating post standards, this thing creates a force structure that you can associate with different levels of increased levels of responsibility, certifications, and education and training.
Yeah, and to that point, let me just ask a discussion question, right? And maybe a show of hands. If in its current form, because there's not much education about it right now in the rank and file, right? And I think that's something what Chief Steve was saying, right, in the lower ranks. If this were to be presented to the employees right now, and it's at its infancy, okay, there hasn't been a plan behind it, right? How many agencies do we think it would be easy to implement this? Like, let's say it was voted and approved, and it had to be implemented right away. How many agencies in the room here think that the employees would be amenable to change?
On the majority group?
On the majority.
You're looking at majority.
Yeah, like, the employees are like, okay, we're on board, it looks like a good idea, let's do it. I mean, it's just, the reason I ask is so that when we go forward, right, to vote on something, right, we know what we're gonna vote on and how it will impact, right?
Yeah, my agency has no clue yet about this. They have no idea about this. I think up here at the management level, we understand the concept, but trying to make a
For
PO1
soldiers,
with the high school diploma, understand a force structure concept, it's like trying to make him understand the budget presentation of the legislature. It's just way over their head. Yeah, because the PO1 doesn't concern himself with the force structure. Right. He doesn't concern himself with my $51 million budget. All he concerns himself about is going in, taking reports, making arrests, patrolling.
Making money and go back home.
Yeah. And getting 51,
Getting paid over.
You want billion.
This is about as useful as a Chinese dictionary.
Yeah.
PO1.
Yeah, so that's the reason why, yes, I understand that education is key. However, it's like, that's the reason why the PO1s are not making the decisions on force structure, and that the leadership is actually making it at an informed level.
But
And
you-
yes, I
Yeah,
agree,
no, I understand,
we should
I
put it out
understand that
there,
management should make the decision.
but we don't
also,
put,
Management should
My
consider
is
it.
important, my is
Yeah.
important because
Right.
these are our people.
These are the foot soldiers that.
Management still has to look at their opinion
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of the.
So one of the things is that we
Police
haven't,
officer, one, understand that you're not a PO anymore, you're LEO 4.
Yeah.
And you turn around and say, what is that?
I mean, that's just, like a reassignment. What I'm trying to get at is that, if we, in line with the mandate, I mean, this is like the draft that, you don't put out a draft when it wasn't complete. So now that we're going through it and we're trying to get the finalized version, once we get the finalized version, then we're able to at least introduce it to the masses. Because if you're gonna keep putting out like, revisions in draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, draft 11, then they're gonna get confused, whereas if after tomorrow, we said, okay, these are the revisions, this is what we agreed to put in, and once we finalize it, we can put it out, so that, we can do an education campaign.
So, it's probably easier for conservation, to do this with their.
Easy for my office, too.
But I have, maybe but I have 267 police officers.
No, I
I
agree.
have done
I
this law
understand
enforcement agency in this room, and how do I get them to even, not even bite the bait, but at least look at the bait?
Yeah.
See they wanna bite it.
But I think we're all in the same where, like Chief Ignacio was just mentioning, overall, we're still kind of protecting each of our respective agencies and still putting up a shield. Make sure that, if I got an officer at UIA said, I didn't apply for this, sir. Often I'm an LEO 4 and I've been supervising this whole ship. I'm gonna be, this is the one that I applied for. And those are the challenges that we're faced, as well as what we're gonna be exposing the rest of our officers to be slowly accepting that this is evolution and this is something that is gonna improve us overall, which is our overall intent, to improve us overall as public safety officers, or law enforcement officers or officers in general, but that's our goal. And even for something like this is a fair start, but we're gonna get that resistance and wow, what does this mean, sir? How often LEO 1 to LEO 15? I've been here for 25 years. So how often now you only LEO 9? Like, sir, I'm already equal to more than GPD's lieutenant and captains at Pocopon reduced but those are the challenges that realistically we're gonna face.
Right, but Dave, like what you're
Yeah.
saying is that, if somebody comes to you and says, I should be, LEO 11,
Yeah,
yeah, maybe you should,
Okay.
but there's a process that will be established, which
Correct.
is normally in the Department of Administration, you have to go through either an audit or there's some internal mechanism that says, okay, and that's what Shane was talking about, is that in moving forward, you're gonna have to identify these little things that come up, and then in moving forward, it's like, okay, Mr. DOA, these are some of the issues. We got a person claiming that he should be an LEO 11, and he's been here for 20 years, and he should be this.
yeah.
And then Shane says, well, according to our policy, this is how you have to submit your information, and then we're gonna go through the process of analyzing it, reviewing it, shooting it through its wickets, and then we will make a determination whether or not it does or does not qualify. Because it's not for you, the agency, or the agency head to say, I believe my officers are this. It's you put in your documentation in relation, and if you don't have any documentation that sets the framework, which this sets out to do, you have no comparison. If you had a comparison, which is the force structure, you can actually say, well, if you go to page 56, it says under LEO 11, I believe I meet these criteria because I've done all this, I have these qualifications. Right now, you don't really have that. You have a generalized, almost like scattered way of trying to look at things, whereas what this hopes to do is to create one centralized way of looking at it, generally speaking, from the post-commission standpoint.
I think.
And that's my intent, is I agree with this, that we're kind of aligning everything in order, because we're just literally pulling things and trying to stack it together. And I agree with us with putting this together so we have something that we can build off of continually.
I think generally, and even for DOA, right, especially if this is where law enforcement and public safety is involved into, we're gonna involve with it. But if I can maybe recommend, right, when a vote is finally taken, right, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we pull it back one step, right, for everyone to vote on, right? Pull it back one step where maybe you have the 15 LEO grades basically, and then you have the tiers, the 4 tiers that you're looking at. Keep the conversation and the vote to that, right, for the legislature to consider. Because that is the framework, that is the structure, right? And we can use as an internal working document for the commission, what you put together for the job specs and everything.
So in other words, remove certain provisions like the job specification.
Yeah, and then,
information.
basically say our intent is to include the competencies in each of the levels, right? Because then it's easier, I think, for every agency to go back and say, okay, guys, generally, we want to move to a 15 grade, 4-tier structure for the force. You may or may not be in the grades, that'll be determined later, but overall, this is trying to consolidate all of us. Where we fall in that, it's gonna be a work in progress at the commission.
Don't lock in what.
Right, and your input's gonna be key, right, on your job. So
Let me see what I can do tonight, and I can remove the police department specific specification information, and then cut it down, and then make it as simple as possible. You might even have less than 20 pages.
Because what's really good for an analysis tool, right, is
Just-
page 5. Your page 5, right, you have the, where it has the tiers, but it also has the competencies.
Right.
In each of those levels, right?
Just to make it a friendly atmosphere for
Right,
the.
so like if I was explaining this to my division, I'd be like, okay, guys, this is generally how we want to break it down, right?
Okay,
And even page 7 is good too, right?
Yeah.
Saying like, this is and page 6. So 5, 6, and 7, I think it's a kind of step back, kind of say, in every agency, we're looking at implementing a force structure. Where we fall in that force structure is gonna be.
so let me retool, and then it should actually be simpler, but really,
Because there's a lot of good discussion in this meet, which we have, and it's, it's been discussed formally, right, in the subcommittee. So then going forward, I think bringing it up one level for discussion with the rank and file.
I have a question. Do the other agencies want these education requirements?
Yeah, and that's it.
That's another one.
Does the DFC want a warden that has a master's degree? Does DIA want a superintendent that has a bachelor's degree? And if they're LEO 14 or 15, do they want that requirement? Because once we pass this and we set it in stone, and we say that it locks everybody in.
Yeah, or out.
Or pushes.
Do you understand historically how we ended up with our requirement from police lieutenant up to police commander, the colonel?
Yeah, academy.
It wasn't a very,
Friendly transition.
It wasn't a beautiful journey down that road,
Yeah.
It came out of, things that were happening at the time, for lack of a better description. I'm not gonna go back in time and describe the elements.
And I guess it's a good point, Chief. You make this,
Yeah,
you've
yes.
already gone through that process of getting something handed down.
Somebody, honestly, no, I don't even know if GPD was asked, hey, do you want a bachelor's degree for your lieutenants or your captains or your majors? They just said, here, this is your requirement now.
Yeah.
Because of things, dynamics that were going on at the time.
yeah.
Within the legislature, the police, and they decided, and that's how we lost our deputy chief. That's how we lost our legal counsel, right? And that's how these requirements came up, right? So because of the disagreements and the ugliness of the time, these were requirements that are now realities and codified in law for the Guam Police Department. But do the other agencies want it, and we're sitting here as commission members, but really, it goes back to that thing, right, of buy-in. Does DOC need a warden that has a master's degree? Does does customs need a chief that has a master's degree? Is it necessary? Is it wanted?
Is it needed?
Yeah.
To get that position,
So.
Yeah, we're really raising
There's
it.
always two schools of thought, right?
Yeah, we're really raising the bars of this, so
Some
I
people
agree,
are-
education.
So we run the risk of raising the bar too high.
It's kind of like what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe gradually,
And I'll tell
maybe,
you,
chief?
I've seen that in some of even for directors for some of the agencies, the bar was set so high, we can't even find candidates, right?
Yeah.
And then there's
Like the
even
post
some of
commission.
the classified positions, right? The bar set so high, I mean, those job announcements have been open for the past 11
And the
years.
pay doesn't match.
Yeah.
That's the problem too.
So one of the things that we can do moving forward is like, because the police department was the benchmark, I can retool this and, I'm pretty sure that when we cut it down and it'll be like a much smaller version, we can allow, for flexibility. So depending on your requirement, whether or not you decide that you need to have a bachelor's or master's, that will not have a play currently once I remove the job specifications. So it'll be incumbent upon
It's like,
each law enforcement agency to do so.
You give an example that the smallest of small agencies we can host is the park rangers. I mean, they're all of 3 people right now. At the height, they probably had 12. You know, how necessary is a master's degree or a bachelor's degree at the park rangers, right?
Yeah.
So
That's
just something
Yeah.
food for thought as we think about this
Right,
force
right.
structure is.
Because they don't have a chief, they have a director.
Yeah, I think their highest ranking officer is called the superintendent of
Yeah.
parks. Yeah.
Yeah, these are all considerations, and.
All good stuff, all good stuff.
Yeah, no,
So
good
what I'll do
ideas.
is I'll retool it, but I like the idea that Shane had about internally, we could utilize, this as like a comparison, but, to generalize it so that, when people read the force structure, there's no specific education requirements, like a master's or bachelor's, or 2 years as this before that. That'll be incumbent upon, the respective, entity to determine.
Right. I guess generalized with also verbiage that's saying that each individual agency has their own, I guess input or.
AQS,
Yes.
qualifications.
Well,
Equivalent to,
in this process is everyone will collect documentation to update their positions, right? A lot of job specs are old, need to be updated, right? This is the opportunity to do it, right? Once the job specs are developed, ratified, and then that's where the process of putting them in an LEO or public safety level will occur, right? Once it's fully updated.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, with Chief Steve, I think if we wanna help update GPD, we'll probably have to help them out with the mandate
It's a
to,
good time to do it, yeah.
reassess it, right?
Yes.
May not need major tweaks, but, I mean, one of the things I want to bring up, because this is what happens with the job specs, right? And I think it happened with your specs too, chief, and statute. Small things like in the rank of versus experience, similar work, right? Change hugely how promotions work, right? So, just a small tidbit in the job spec when we develop them, we take those.
Give me an example of what you mean by that.
So when people are evaluated, or if they're gonna move up, right? So let's say with the chief's positions, 1 year is to get to a PO3, you need 2 years of experience in the rank of a PO2. Versus with PO2 work.
so you're talking about
So in other words,
equivalency.
they have to have held a position.
Correct.
Which restricts you from being able to
Correct.
qualify.
Go from B1 to lieutenant.
So is the verbiage actually equivalency?
Well, it depends on how the commission or each agency sees it. In some agencies, equivalencies work. In others, depending on how rigid the structure is,
Right.
it may not work.
Right.
Because you may need those competencies from the lower level, right, at a certain level, right?
Right, so what is Shane's talking about, right? So this is the police lieutenant by law. Police lieutenant shall be a uniform classified officer, shall meet the following minimum qualifications, experience, and training. In addition to those prescribed by DOA. Graduated with an associate's degree in police science, criminal justice, admin, public admin. And then B, must have at least 2 years of experience in the rank of police sergeant too. That's exactly what Shane's talking about, right? You can't go up unless you have.
Unless you have both.
Unless you were a sergeant two, so what if you were a sergeant one for 15 years?
Yeah.
You
Right?
can't be.
More than likely, you've done sergeant two work,
But
right?
can, Chief, Shane, can that supersede if actually you have a letter stating the fact that I temporarily have officer so-and-so under, my direction to be holding the position,
Filling the position of sergeant two.
sergeant two?
Generally, in that case, no, because you would have had to actually be promoted to a sergeant two.
So what about that provision that follows that says any equivalent combination of education, law enforcement, training, and experience? So
Right,
that
depending
kind of
on
fixes it, right?
Whether the job spec has any equivalency, that's where.
Yeah.
That's what I was coming.
That's where that letter takes place.
Yes.
But when we crafted going forward, right, because already what's been done, has been done. When we crafted it in an effort to help chief, right, with his job specs, because it's statutory, that's where the commission wants to step in and say, we've worked together, this is what we think. Legislature and all the flexibility for the commission to help GPD with the job specs, all that. Only because the benchmark agency. Right.
Flexibility for two things. One, the polls can make updates or amendments, and two, for each agency to submit.
Correct.
Right. So-
Correct. And
Yeah,
that way.
and that's always been one of the things in moving forward is,
And also it's gonna be reviewed.
no, three things, because you said, public safety officer.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just wanted to make sure we cover everybody and not leave someone out,
Deal to public safety.
So,
Okay, do we have any other questions? Otherwise, tomorrow I'll give you a copy of the revised,
We haven't answered Shane's own request, Chief.
what was the request?
How many of the agencies?
Oh, so yeah, no, I think we kind of went through.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the stands right now.
Okay,
I just wanted to go
Yeah.
back to that.
And then that's why I recommended going back
Yeah.
and stuff.
okay, so tomorrow, we should have maybe a quicker meeting. I just recommend everybody go through. We might as well disregard the, job specification information. And then, we should be okay.
yeah, let's have a quicker meeting tomorrow, please. We just look at
Well,
the
that's
revised.
why I brought some.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Chief, I have a question real quick.
Sir.
You mentioned earlier that, the, GFT, was invited, or do they have a copy of, your proposal?
I
Because
sent,
we're, like the chief mentioned, we're right in the middle of a CBA.
I sent a copy to,
Richard Kress, Mr.
Kress.
Delphi?
Yes, actually,
Okay, so they know about it.
Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, Major, he was here on our last, I think,
There he was.
the meeting.
yes,
Oh, Rich?
yes, he was
It was
here the
okay.
last two.
Richard
Yeah.
Kress.
Yeah.
Richard Kress was
Yeah.
here the last one.
Okay, all right, just wanted to make sure.
Chris, Chief.
And I sent him an invite,
Yeah, but we were not in here.
Did you invite him to today?
yes.
Yes,
So
the rain stopped.
City of Stone. Or that.
Okay, any other things before we, conclude?
Okay.
We'll go around the room, right? Any-
Was it?
No, I'm good.
It's just a comment we made during the conversation.
Okay. Chief said no. Yes, no.
All right.
Thank you,
Okay,
Chief.
thank you guys for, coming here for this meeting. We'll just come in tomorrow. I will have an updated, draft for your review, but I would suggest just going into this document, trying to see if there's anything else that you may see that may, you might want to discuss further. Otherwise, you're welcome to have some refreshments, behind me. And, I will conclude the, meeting. It is, 11:47. Thank you. Thank you, sir.